A little girl at a dusty military base in Nevada spotted a problem with a war truck engine before the Army's own engineers did. Armed with nothing but a notebook and a sharp eye, she stepped forward and changed everything. What followed was more than a mechanical fix. It was a life-changing moment of recognition, trust, and a second chance. This touching story of a little girl who rewrote the rules of military engineering will move you in ways you didn't expect. But first, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We love seeing our community across the globe. Let's get started. The morning sun had just begun its slow ascent over the barren stretch of desert in Nevada, casting long shadows across the dusty military testing grounds. Amid the silence broken only by the low hum of diesel engines and the distant clang of metal on metal, an 11-year-old girl named Emily Grace pressed her small hands against the chain-link fence that surrounded Fort Sentinel, one of the U.S. Army's most secure armored vehicle development bases. Emily was no ordinary child. While other kids her age were obsessed with social media or schoolyard games, Emily lived for schematics, coolant diagrams, and torque ratios. For as long as she could remember, she had been fascinated by military-grade war trucks, their power, precision, and the engineering marvel hidden beneath layers of steel. Her father, Nathan Grace, worked inside the base as a low-level mechanic, and though Emily had never been permitted past the gates, she knew more about those trucks than most of the team inside. She had taught herself everything page by page, late at night under a desk lamp while her parents struggled to understand their daughter's unusual passion. That morning, drawn by the distant cough of an engine, Emily was about to witness something that would change her life and the military's forever. Emily was crouched low, her notebook resting on her knees as she scribbled furiously, trying to capture the odd rhythm of a nearby TX-9 Vanguard war truck being test-driven along the perimeter trail. To anyone else, it might have sounded like a standard warm-up cycle. But Emily knew better. The hiccup in its low-end RPMs, the inconsistent rise in exhaust pressure, those were not signs of a healthy cooling system. Suddenly, a voice broke the silence. "Hey, you can't be this close to the fence," barked Corporal Lily Sanders, a young and determined soldier assigned to perimeter patrol. She was new to Fort Sentinel and hadn't expected to find a kid alone near the outer barrier. Her tone was stern, but her eyes softened slightly when she saw Emily's innocent face, wide with curiosity, not fear. Emily stood up slowly, brushing the dirt off her jeans. "I'm sorry. I was just listening to the Vanguard." She pointed toward the vehicle lumbering across the far side of the testing track. "There's something wrong with the secondary cooling regulator. It's overcompensating, which usually means the primary's about to fail." Corporal Sanders blinked, unsure if she had just stepped into a science fiction film. "You're 11, right?" "Almost 12, Emily replied confidently. The corporal's first instinct was to dismiss her, but something about the girl's certainty made her pause. "What makes you think that?" Emily flipped her notebook around, showing detailed hand-drawn diagrams of the TX-9 engine layout. "See the heat dispersion patterns that sputter between gears. It's not random. It's strain probably coming from a cracked actuator or a fault in the central regulation relay." Before the corporal could respond, the air shifted. The sound of a door slamming echoed across the field, and General Marcus Dean emerged from a black tactical vehicle parked nearby, tall, broad-shouldered, and built like a granite wall. General Dean was known across the region for his zero-tolerance command style. He noticed the odd duo standing near the fence and immediately strode toward them. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice sharp, heavy with command. Corporal Sanders stood at attention. "Sir, civilian intrusion near the fence. Just a local kid. No threat, sir." General Dean's eyes fell on Emily. Local kid? Then why was she pointing at our war trucks and rambling about cooling systems? Emily's cheeks flushed, but she didn't back down. "Because I saw something wrong. The Vanguard's primary regulator isn't cycling properly. If it fails completely during a field op, you might have a system meltdown. The general raised a skeptical brow. And where exactly did you learn the tick-tock? No, sir, Emily said, voice steady despite the heat rising around them. I've been studying military truck systems for years. Books, public manuals, engineering forums. My dad works here, but I've never touched classified material. I just know what I'm seeing. General Dean let out a low grunt. A little girl diagnosing equipment failure from a fence line. That's a bold claim. He turned to Sanders. Escort her off base property. And have someone inform her parents. Corporal Sanders hesitated. Yes, sir. But, sir, she might be right. Dean froze mid-step. Excuse me. I don't know how, but her assessment matches the reports I've seen from last week's test logs, Sanders said nervously. They've been having trouble pinpointing the issue. Maybe it's worth. General Dean raised a hand. Enough. We don't validate theories from children. We follow protocol. Emily watched him turn his back on her, a deep ache forming in her chest not from rejection, but from something worse being unheard. But just as she turned to leave with Sanders, another figure entered the scene, a grizzled man in oil-stained overalls. It was her father, Nathan Grace, fresh off his shift. Emily, he called out, voice tight with both concern and confusion. The moment he locked eyes with his daughter, standing beside a general, her notebook clutched tightly to her chest, he realized this wasn't just a curious child poking around. Something much bigger was happening. Nathan Grace rushed forward, his boots kicking up clouds of red dust as he reached the fence line. His eyes darted between his daughter and the imposing general, already sensing that Emily had landed herself in serious trouble, but he didn't yet know how serious. Emily, what are you doing here? You're not supposed to be near the fence, he said, voice low but laced with panic. Emily looked up at him with a mixture of hope and guilt. Dad? I heard the Vanguard's engine misfiring. I think the regulator's about to fail. Nathan froze. As a mechanic who'd spent 15 years under military vehicles, he knew better than most what those symptoms meant. But he also knew how dangerous it was for his daughter to even suggest anything like that out loud, especially in front of brass like General Dean. Sir, Nathan said quickly, turning to face the general, I deeply apologize. My daughter's just enthusiastic. She means no disrespect. I'll get her out of here immediately. Dean didn't blink. Your daughter just implied my testing crews missed a critical system flaw on a vehicle we're deploying in 3 weeks. That's not enthusiasm. That's interference. Before Nathan could respond, a voice crackled through a nearby radio. Command, this is engineering. We've had a thermal spike on Vanguard Unit 6 secondary systems showing load instability. Looks like the regulator's compensating for an unseen fault. Requesting diagnostic override. All eyes turned toward the direction of the testing track. The truck Emily had been watching was slowing to a halt, steam rising faintly from its rear vents. The radio burst again. Looks like we're on the edge of failure. Standing by for shutdown command. A wave of tension fell over the group. The general's face stiffened. Emily's voice, soft but clear, broke the silence. It's what I said earlier. The secondary system is doing too much. The primary regulator isn't responding consistently. That's why it's cycling hot and cold. You'll see the same pattern if you look at the fluid dynamics on the intake route. General Dean slowly turned back toward her. This time, he didn't speak. Corporal Sanders stepped forward, holding her own field tablet. Sir, I've just pulled the logs from the last 3 test runs. There's a spike every 14 minutes, just like she said. I think she's right. Nathan stood in stunned silence. He had always known Emily was smart, brilliant, but seeing her technical theories come to life in real time in front of officers and engineers hit him like a bolt of lightning. And it wasn't just him. The entire group, soldiers, technicians, even the general had begun looking at her differently. A new figure appeared from the base entrance, Dr. Evelyn Chambers, head of Fort Sentinel's Diagnostic Research Division. She walked briskly, tablet in hand, her expression unreadable. "I heard the comms chatter," she said, glancing briefly at Emily. "What's this about a civilian child diagnosing a system failure before our sensors did?" General Dean, pride clearly bruised, gestured toward Emily. "This is the girl. She saw something in the Vanguard's engine cycle that we apparently missed." Dr. Chambers knelt beside Emily, studying her notebook like it was classified intelligence. "You wrote all this from observation." Emily nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am. I've been reading your published manuals for a few years now. I didn't mean to cause trouble." "You didn't cause trouble," Dr. Chambers said, rising to her feet. "You may have just prevented it." The word struck Nathan deep in his chest. For the first time, he realized his daughter's gift wasn't a distraction. It was a contribution, one that just might save lives. The general folded his arms, still visibly uncomfortable, but he gave a slight nod. "Have the truck towed for teardown? I want full diagnostics within the hour. And bring this one." He pointed at Emily. "Charles, to Engineering Command. Let's see what else she can observe." Emily's eyes widened. I can go inside." "For now," Dean grunted. "Just don't outsmart my staff too quickly." And just like that, the little girl who spent her nights buried in technical manuals was no longer looking through the fence. She was walking past it. Inside Fort Sentinel's Engineering Command Center, the atmosphere was tense but electric. Monitors glowed with real-time diagnostics, and a team of uniformed specialists hovered around the screen, displaying the Vanguard's critical systems. In the middle of it all stood Emily Grace, barely tall enough to see the table, her notebook still clutched tightly against her chest. General Marcus Dean stood a few paces away, arms crossed, silently watching. It was clear that something inside him had shifted. He wasn't ready to admit it, not out loud, but this little girl had forced open a door he never thought would exist, the possibility that expertise might wear sneakers and carry a hand-drawn diagram instead of a badge and credentials. Emily sat beside Dr. Evelyn Chambers, who pulled up comparison data on a touchscreen. "Look here," she said, pointing to a diagnostic wave pattern. "This fluctuation was that what you noticed from outside the fence." Emily nodded, barely hiding her excitement. "That dip right there. That's what happens when the regulator gets stuck in a partial fail state. It tricks the system into thinking it's working when it's actually pushing the load onto the secondary line." Dr. Chambers glanced at General Dean. "She's not guessing. She understands what she's saying." Nathan stood awkwardly in the corner, his uniform stained with oil, his hands wringing the brim of his work cap. He hadn't spoken since they entered the room. He was a man used to wrenches and torque specs, not Pentagon-grade attention. But as he listened to his daughter break down thermodynamic failure modes to career military engineers, he felt a powerful knot of guilt twist in his stomach. For years, he had brushed off Emily's interest as cute but fleeting a childhood phase, something she'd eventually outgrow. He had begged her to play with other kids, to stop spending so much time buried in manuals meant for men twice her age. And now, here she was holding the attention of minds who normally wouldn't even glance at a civilian contractor, let alone his 11-year-old daughter. "Mr. Grace?" General Dean's voice startled him. "How long has your daughter been studying this kind of material?" Nathan cleared his throat. "Since she was about 7, I thought it was a hobby. She'd sneak into my garage, pull apart engine models, rebuild them from memory. I never thought it would mean anything real." Dean grunted. "Well, it means something now." A low beep sounded from the central console. One of the tech officers looked up. "Sir, the full diagnostic report is in. Confirmed intermittent failure on the primary cooling regulator, cracked housing, and unstable relay response." The kid was dead on. Dead on. The phrase echoed in the room like a verdict. General Dean didn't speak for several moments. Finally, he stepped forward and crouched beside Emily. "You saved us from rolling out a defective system. "Miss Grace," he said, voice low but genuine, "that failure could have compromised a convoy under live conditions. And you saw it, from 100 yards away." Emily shrugged lightly. "I just read a lot, and I listened carefully." He chuckled, a rare sound. "You've got more sense than half my officers." Then something happened that none of them expected. He stood and turned to Nathan. "Mr. Grace, I'd like to authorize your daughter for limited technical observation status. She'll be allowed to consult with our engineering team under your supervision, and we'll make sure she has access to training resources that match her abilities." Nathan was speechless. Emily blinked. "Wait, does that mean I'm part of the team?" Dr. Chambers smiled. "It means we'll be learning from you, too." In that moment, the world tilted. The base, the soldiers, the rules they hadn't changed. But how they saw Emily had. No longer just a curious child at the fence. She was now a bridge between instinct and institution, between brilliance and bureaucracy. And for the first time, Nathan didn't just admire his daughter. He believed in her. By the end of the week, Emily Grace had her own laminated access badge, bright yellow with bold red letters, Civilian Technical Observer. It hung around her neck on a lanyard that was far too big for her, but she wore it like a Medal of Honor. Her new schedule was unlike anything she or her parents had ever imagined. 3 days a week after school. Emily reported to Hangar 12, the engineering nerve center of Fort Sentinel, while her classmates were learning basic algebra. Emily was learning how to interpret coolant flow simulations, torque imbalance ratios, and stress test diagnostics on million-dollar armored trucks. At first, the engineering team treated her like a novelty, an interesting case study, a kid genius. But that didn't last. Because after the third time, Emily caught a pattern they had missed after she correctly predicted a failing heat exchanger. Before it triggered a fault alert, the novelty wore off. She was no longer just impressive. She was useful. And soon, the Department of Defense noticed. One morning, a black SUV rolled through the checkpoint. It didn't carry soldiers, it carried suits. Among them was Dr. Roland Price, Director of Emerging Talent at ARPA, Advanced Research Projects Agency. He'd heard about Emily's analysis and requested a meeting with the little mechanic with battlefield instincts. Emily was seated in the engineering bay when he arrived, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside an open diagnostic panel. She was scribbling notes with grease on her fingers and smudges on her cheeks. Roland smiled. "I've read your field reports, Emily. Quite a mind you've got." She looked up, squinting in the light. "You read my reports." He chuckled. "Every single one. You identified a torque lag in the Vengeance-class transmission system before the AI did. That's not just rare, it's unheard of." Emily's ears turned pink. "I just understand the way machines talk. You just have to listen to what's not working." Dr. Price knelt beside her, lowering his voice. "We'd like to invite you into our Young Innovators program. You'd continue working with the base team, but you'd also get access to advanced simulators, virtual diagnostics, and direct mentorship from our top engineers. We'd customize it to your school schedule, but it would mean stepping into a bigger world." Emily. Nathan and Emily's mom, Claire, were called in for the formal discussion. Sitting in a conference room surrounded by military advisors and civilian liaisons. Claire looked as if she were still catching up to what her daughter had become. "She's still a child," Claire said, her voice trembling. "She likes bedtime stories and peanut butter sandwiches." Dr. Price nodded, "And she'll continue to be. We're not asking her to stop being a kid, we're offering a way to nurture who she already is. You don't get many Emilys in a generation. Our mistake would be ignoring her." Nathan sat quietly for a while before finally speaking. "What happens if we say no?" Price didn't flinch. "Then we thank her for what she's already done, and we keep those armored trucks rolling because of her. But if you say yes, she helps rewrite how we train engineers, how we listen to machines, how we solve problems before they become headlines." Emily looked to her parents, eyes wide but steady. "I don't want to leave home. I just want to keep helping." Claire took her daughter's hand, tears brimming but a smile breaking through. "Then we'll make it work, honey." Nathan nodded slowly, pride finally overtaking his caution. "Let's give her that bigger world." That night, Emily returned home not just with her badge, but with something else, a sealed envelope bearing the official ARPA insignia and a title she never dreamed she'd earn so soon. Provisional Civilian Research Fellow, age 11. And so, the girl who once sat outside the fence was now building bridges no one had thought to draw. 3 months later, Fort Sentinel had changed, and so had Emily Grace. Inside Hangar 12 technicians now double-checked their data after asking Emily for her thoughts. Senior engineers requested her input on anomaly reports. Even General Marcus Dean, once skeptical and stiff, had grown accustomed to ending meetings with a glance toward the smallest person in the room and asking, "Emily, what's your read?" But Emily hadn't just gained trust, she had grown into it. She no longer tiptoed across the concrete floors of the base. She moved with purpose. She spoke with calm clarity, never arrogant, but never shrinking. When someone questioned her assessment, she didn't bristle or flinch. She explained, she taught, and often she was right. Still, she was very much a child, laughing at oil smudges on her nose, organizing her notes with colored markers, and riding her scooter from the base entrance to the engineering bay, because, in her words, bikes don't corner as tight. At home, her family dynamic transformed. Her mother, Claire, no longer winced when Emily launched into a 10-minute monologue about hydraulic pressure inconsistencies. She listened. Her father, Nathan, had turned Emily's old treehouse into a miniature workshop fitted with a whiteboard, shelves of salvaged engine parts, and a sign on the door that read, "Private Lab, knock first." The entire Grace household had grown around Emily's light, rather than trying to dim it. What truly defined her growth, though, was what happened one Friday afternoon. Emily had just finished reviewing a new fuel intake system for the XR92 line, a prototype vehicle scheduled for desert testing. She noticed something odd in the simulation, a recurring pattern that wasn't technically an error, but didn't quite feel right either. She flagged it, created a full analysis, and submitted her recommendation: postpone live testing, pending review of sensor feedback delay. Simple, clear, professional. 3 hours later, the request was denied. The lead engineer on the XR92 program, Dr. Frederick Lang, insisted it was well within tolerance, and that Emily's concern was based on theoretical speculation rather than proven fault. He added, not subtly, that her age made her prone to overreaction. Most kids would have let it go. Emily didn't. She returned home, printed every data set related to the XR92's feedback loop, and began running her own simulations, adjusting conditions, expanding stress variables, tweaking thermal ranges. She stayed up until 1:30 a.m., fueled by microwaved mac and cheese and quiet determination. What she found startled even her. The delay wasn't harmless. It compounded under high-speed terrain conditions and could, within an hour of active deployment, trigger catastrophic fuel misfire. Emily brought her findings straight to Dr. Chambers the next morning. Chambers reviewed the analysis in stunned silence, then picked up the phone and halted the XR92 field test 12 minutes before rollout. By noon, the report was circulating through Fort Sentinel and up the chain to ARPA headquarters. Dr. Lang was instructed to formally acknowledge his oversight. Emily was commended in a base-wide briefing. She was no longer just a prodigy. She was a protector. General Dean shook her hand the next day, saying simply, "You saved lives." That night, Nathan found her sitting quietly in the workshop treehouse, staring out the window, not drawing, not sketching. Just still. "You okay, kiddo?" he asked gently. Emily nodded. "It's just strange. Dad, I used to read about engineers catching flaws before disaster struck. Now I am one." Nathan smiled. "That's because you've grown into exactly who you were meant to be. And you've still got miles to go." Emily turned toward her desk, picked up a fresh notepad, and began to write. She wasn't chasing knowledge anymore. She was leading it. 6 months after the day she stood on the other side of the fence, Emily Grace stood on the command deck of the XR-92 not as a spectator, but as a consultant. A specially issued patch on her jacket read, Civilian Technical Fellow, Strategic Diagnostics Division. Beneath it, in smaller print, age 11. The XR-92, now affectionately nicknamed M92 by the mechanics, was ready for its first full operational trial. The changes Emily had recommended: sensor recalibrations, updated heat flow logic, reinforced intake modules had been implemented across all 4 prototype units. Engineers across the base now referenced Grace's loop model when assessing thermal feedback sequences. She hadn't just prevented a failure, she'd changed the standard. That morning, General Marcus Dean stood beside her as the engine rumbled to life. The grizzled man who once dismissed her as a curious nuisance now looked at her the way a general might look at a battle-tested strategist. "I underestimated you, Emily," he said plainly. She smiled softly. "So did I. In the beginning." The test went flawlessly. The vehicle handled the terrain with ease. Diagnostics came back cleaner than they had in months. And as the team celebrated, Emily stood slightly apart, watching, absorbing. Later that afternoon, she was called to a secure meeting inside Command Briefing Room A, a space usually reserved for Pentagon calls and strategic simulations. Inside sat her parents, Dr. Evelyn Chambers, and a new-faced director, Helen Rhodes, a senior official from the Department of Defense's Innovation Division. "Emily," Director Rhodes began, her voice kind but serious, "we've reviewed your contributions, not just to Fort Sentinel, but to our wider strategic engineering initiatives. You've redefined what early-stage diagnostics look like." Emily's eyes widened. "I just tried to help." "You did more than that," Rhodes continued. "We want to formalize your role. This would be a civilian research appointment under the DoD's Advanced Problem-Solving Initiative. You'd help us review prototype systems across multiple branches. With your parents' approval?" "Of course." Claire gasped. Nathan leaned back, visibly overwhelmed. Emily sat still for a moment, then asked the only question that mattered to her: would I still get to eat dinner at home? The entire room chuckled, then paused. Because Emily wasn't joking. Rhodes smiled. "Yes? You'd still go to school. You'd still get to ride your scooter and have Saturdays off. But when we need your mind, we'll call." Nathan looked over at his daughter, marveling at her balanced brilliance without ego, discipline without pressure, purpose without being pushed. He nodded. "We're in." That evening, as the sun dipped over the Nevada desert, painting Fort Sentinel gold, Emily stood outside the fence again, this time on the inside, looking out. A small group of children from the nearby community center had come to watch the XR-92 roll past. One boy, maybe 9 years old, asked his counselor, "Who's the girl in the jacket? She looks like a kid," but they all listened to her. The counselor smiled. "That's Emily Grace. She's kind of a hero around here." Emily heard him, and for the first time, the title didn't feel too big. She walked over, knelt beside the boy, and said, "Want to see something cool? Come here, I'll show you how to read engine heat patterns just by listening." And just like that, she passed the fence line again, not to chase her future, but to open the gate for someone else. Emily Grace's story is a powerful reminder that extraordinary talent doesn't need permission to exist, only the space to be recognized. She didn't wait for someone to validate her knowledge. She followed her instincts, trusted her studies, and chose courage over silence. The world often overlooks potential simply because it doesn't come in the expected package: young, small, soft-spoken, uncredentialed. But brilliance doesn't wear a uniform. It doesn't carry a degree. Sometimes, it shows up in the form of an 11-year-old girl holding a notebook at a fence line. What changed Emily's life wasn't just her intelligence, it was her persistence, her willingness to stand firm even when powerful people told her she was wrong. That's where transformation begins, not just in being right, but in being brave enough to speak up. If Emily's story inspired you, imagine how many other hidden talents are out there waiting to be heard. Show your support by hitting that like button, subscribing to our channel, and leaving a comment below. What would you say to someone who feels like their voice doesn't matter?